This guy is called John Maynard Keynes. He's an economist. In the 1930s, he wrote an essay. The essay was called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. In this essay, he predicted what life would be like for his grandchildren 100 years on. By 2030, people would only need to work 15 hours a week on average, thanks to the developments in technology and science that would trickle down to the common man. Our main problem would be how to occupy the leisure that we now had. He believed that this newfound leisure would be like such a big problem for us. We wouldn't know what to do with all this time. And if you don't know who Keynes was, he is like one of the most renowned people in economics. He's like Einstein kind of level of fame and recognition in his field. And yet he was clearly super duper off the mark here. Unless something changes significantly in the next 6 years, I don't think that we're going to be working 15 hours a week on average. And there is no better example of this than the country of Greece, because recently they've decided to go another direction by announcing what they call a growth-oriented 6-day work week. If you're anything like me, you probably had like a visceral reaction to reading this headline. You know, the kind of reaction you have when you like pick up like a glass of orange juice and take a swig when you thought it was going to be water. Yeah, that's how I felt when I read this. But I think we can look a little bit past the headline, and I want to go into like a little bit more detail. And I think this is relevant even if you're not from Greece or even if you have no affiliation to the place, because it tells a story about labor rights worldwide, and it tells a story about, I think, the overall direction that I think that the world of work is going to go. We're going to see if we can kind of see what's going on here and figure out, is Greece cooking with this? Are they cooking with the 6-day work week? And if you don't know much about Greece, I'm going to give you a little bit of context as to what the Greek people are going through, because I imagine that you are going through something similar in your country, although probably not quite to this extreme. This is a graph here of what average annual wages look like in Greece from 2007 down to 2024 today. In the space of 17 years, the Greek people have lost a quarter of their salaries. I could like talk all day about why this graph exists, but I don't want to talk about a single graph all day. So I'm just going to give you like the spark notes. So in 2008, there was like a financial crisis. You probably heard of it. I was playing Call of Duty while my parents were like worrying if we were going to get evicted at the time. But you know, everyone had their own experience. Turns out that Greece's government had been cooking the books slightly. They actually had like an extra 30 billion of government debt that had been obfuscated by corruption and bad reporting and people just like taking money out of the government coffers for themselves. So after this financial crisis in 2008 and the 30 billion of extra debt was uncovered, Greece went into like a second financial crisis, the Greek debt crisis. You can see pretty precisely in the graph where the 2010 crisis begins, right? They start to recover and then no, it goes right down. And the response, the solution that the Greek government found was austerity measures, which is effectively just cutting funding to all social programs, cutting funding to schools, to emergency services, to everything, right? To the roads, to government civil servants. And you'd think this would help, it might save them a bit of money, but it turns out that if you have like nobody working for you in the government, you can't really get anything done either. So Greece has been in a bit of a shitstorm. There's another graph that kind of highlights how bad the situation is over there. This shows unemployment in Greece compared to the US during the Great Depression. So the Great Depression was the worst financial crisis of the 20th century. And at its peak, Greece's unemployment hit 28%, higher than the worst financial crisis of the 20th century. These people are down bad. And, you know, when you have no government, no jobs, and nothing to live for in Greece, you're probably going to end up leaving. So about 500,000 Greek people have left since this financial crisis. 69% of these people who are leaving have a master's or PhD, which is crazy. This is what we call a brain drain. So a brain drain is when your country loses not just people, but your smartest people, right? Your people who would be actually like taking positions of leadership and pushing things forward. So Greece has had this like situation going on and got a bit of a triple whammy at the moment. They've got a financial crisis, they've got a labor crisis because everyone's left, and they've got a population crisis. This is the picture at the moment. They are not doing well. They have been in somewhat of a like recovery lately in GDP. So if you don't know what GDP is, it's gross domestic product. It's like the total value of everything that's sold in a country. And it's a number that you can use to measure the size of the economy. If you just look at this number, which is what most countries use as the main benchmark every year, it kind of looks like Greece is back on the up. They're kind of cooking. However, when you see that unemployment in Greece is still incredibly high, you realize that people's living standards aren't tied to this one number, GDP. So unemployment in Greece is still the second highest in Europe, and people just aren't having very good lives. And so the government of Greece launched this 6-day work week as part of a set of labor reforms to really get the country going, right? This 6-day work week has a few conditions. Any business that operates 24 hours a day can mandate a 6-day work week. They can tell their workers that they have to come in 6 days a week or just quit the job, right? They do have to pay a 40% overtime supplement, but some people would rather have an extra day of their lives every week. And it's optional, but not for the workers. So the employers can choose to opt out of the scheme and not participate. But the employees can't. So if your manager comes up to you and tells you that you have to work 6 days a week, then you have no choice but to do it or to leave your job. You might think, why would any country do this, right? What possible logic would you have to do this? What would Kyriakos Mitsotakis say, the Prime Minister of Greece, if you asked him why this policy has been passed? Well, you might say the following. You might say that the additional working day is only permissible in the case of an increased workload. Importantly, they don't specify what this actually means in terms of an increased workload. You might also say that the new rule aims to protect from undeclared work. So you might say that people are already working 6-day weeks. We just want them to do it legally and be able to get rewarded for it properly and for the tax money to be collected. And you might also make, this is probably the more ludicrous claim, that it brings Greece in line with the rest of Europe. So he is correct that there is a law in Europe called the Working Time Directive that means that employers can ask you to work up to 48 hours, but employees can opt out at will. It can't be forced on you. And that's kind of an EU level rule. You might also neglect to mention the fact that Greeks actually already have the highest working hours of any country in the EU. You might also forget the fact that 4-day work weeks have been trialed across the world actually at the moment, and they've got an incredible degree of success. So there was a pilot project in the UK to try a 4-day work week on around 70 companies, and 51% of those companies permanently adopted the change. Now, opposition parties were not pleased to see this, and they kind of went in quite hard on the Greek government. You can see that they say, within 5 years of ND government, ND is the current ruling party, labour in Greece has been degraded. The standard of living of workers has deteriorated. Controls on health and safety at work have been weakened, while most of the rights that protected the world of work have been abolished. I feel like you could just replace this with whatever government your country has, and you could replace this part with whatever country you're living in. Maybe I'm being a bit of a doomer, but I don't know what it's like in your country. Do you feel like labour rights have gotten stronger? The workers naturally have been quite annoyed about this. There have been protests in the street, people are kicking off, and they are clearly not very happy. And you might wonder, say, while all of this is going on, while the people are clearly quite unhappy, what is the Prime Minister doing? What's the leader doing for his people, right? Well, he is currently hanging out with Coldplay and Chris Martin while his country is kicking off and clearly unhappy. He's living his best life. Now, I was actually going to show you some of the comments on this post. I Google translated them, but they were kind of a bit too mean, I think, for a YouTube video. And as I said at the start, it might just sound like I'm talking about Greece, this is just an interesting case study, but I think it goes way deeper than that, because I can almost guarantee that your country, if you live in a relatively developed country, has had some kind of labour issues in the last few years. I found this screenshot of a tweet from really late December last year, about the landing page of the New York Times. And there were 4 stories about occupation and job complaints. Doctors and pharmacists are revolting. Air traffic controllers are pushed to the brink of their limits. College faculty are struggling. And women in magic are getting mad as well. And that's a remarkably common sentiment, right? This is a sentiment that's permeating relatively stable countries like the US and countries that have been in disarray for 20 years like Greece. There's the whole idea of the American dream, which is supposed to be social mobility through work. And if inflation eats away at the value of your labor, the idea of social mobility starts to die, right? And you start to believe that there's no point in even trying anymore. It's important because people, first of all, don't understand what they need to do to fight back against it. And I would say the first step is just to educate yourself. I guarantee there are going to be a number of Greek workers who are going to be very surprised when they, go in on Monday and their manager is like, can we have a chat? And the chat is about them having to work an extra day every week, right? Because they just literally didn't know that this law was going to get passed. And, the second step is to unionize, obviously, right? To organize as laborers. I would highly suggest you investigate that world, because union workers always get paid higher than non-unionized workers.